Good morning. Good morning. I'm sorry, is this your bench? I just thought that I would sit in it for a minute because I am walking home and it's been such an emotional week, with everything that has happened, that I thought it would be okay if I sat here for a minute. You don't know what happened? Have you been away? Oh, you've been away. Oh, so you've missed it. You've missed the whole story. Well, let me tell you the story as I know it, because it's a really good story. So, I am a weaver, and I deal in the purple and the royal colors, and I sell them in my shop in my small town. And a friend of mine from a very long time was John. You've all heard about John. Well, I met Jesus because of John. And because, John is kind of a weird sort of guy. He didn't wear any of my fabric. He had the camel's hair, and he had the locusts, and he had all that good stuff. Kind of an interesting guy, but one of the things that was amazing about knowing him was that he knew Jesus. And I got involved with following Jesus because of the day that John and Jesus met, that day that Jesus was baptized. That was an amazing day. You wouldn't have believed what had happened. It seemed like an ordinary sort of day, but when Jesus was baptized, it was like the skies opened and the whole world changed. That was an amazing day. And then people started to follow Jesus. They started listening to what he was saying, but he wasn't saying all of the things that they expected him to say. Because what they thought that he was going to be, they thought that he was going to be a ruler just like the Pharisees. They thought that he was going to be the kind of person that would order them around and tell them about how great he was and how powerful he was. And he didn't do any of those things. And so those were, at the beginning, sort of confusing days. Nobody knew exactly yet what was going to happen. But then, Jesus started attracting more and more and more attention. Jesus started getting people who were coming from miles around, and not only did they come from far away, but they came to stay. And they followed him from place to place, and they listened to everything that he said, and then they were telling other people about it. And in spite of the fact that the Pharisees were not happy about the kinds of things that Jesus would talk about, those were times when it was confusing. The times when people were following him was just amazing. I even saw him. I was there. He fed more than 5,000 people with almost no food. We still don't know how he did it. I keep talking to Andrew and Philip, and they keep counting. No, there were only 5 loaves, really. There were only 5 loaves. Those were amazing days. But at the same time that Jesus was attracting the attention of all of these people from miles around, he was also attracting the attention of the Pharisees and the high priests and the Romans. They were not happy with the attention that Jesus was getting. They were not happy with the things that he was saying. They were not happy that he was talking about things that did not put them in a good light. They kept sending people to try to trick him. They sent a lawyer once to try to talk about how the legal law said that he shouldn't be healing on the Sabbath. Those were frightening days. One of the great things about it was that Jesus always had an answer. Jesus knew every time they challenged him on something just what to say to make sure that they knew that he knew more than they knew. Jesus had an answer for everything. Jesus taught us how to look at the big picture, how not to get stuck in our own places. When they talked about the Sabbath, he talked about compassion. When they talked about the law, he talked about loving your neighbor. When they talked about the fact that the Pharisees were in charge, he let them know that God is in charge. Every single challenge they had for him, he answered. After a while, it got to be kind of funny because you were waiting to see who he was going to put in their place next. It was great. Those were great days. It gave us a whole new perspective on how to look at serving God and all of those things. So now, of course, you can imagine that the Romans and the Pharisees are getting even more annoyed. And they're hoping that someone following Jesus is going to get tired of him. They're hoping that someone will help them betray him. They're hoping that they can trick someone into turning them over. And those were truly frightening days, because they were skulking around. You never knew where you were going to find them, and they were always ready to find somebody that was discontent with following him. But then, not only were people not tired of following him, you should have seen what it was like the day we went into Jerusalem. Now, Jesus had been telling us for weeks that he had to go to Jerusalem. He kept telling us how hard it was going to be. But not that day. Not the day that we went into Jerusalem. You should have seen the people. They were shouting. It was like a procession when you crowned a new king. They were putting their palms on the ground. They were shouting Hosanna. They were joyful. There was no mistaking the tone, the fact that he was being welcomed, the fact that he was the one that so many had been waiting for. That was an amazing day. But then the tone of the week changed, and it changed so quickly we still couldn't figure out how it happened. Jesus started to act very strangely. In fact, he totally lost his cool in the temple. He was turning tables over. He was shouting. He was talking about how people didn't understand how to honor God. We couldn't understand what was going on with him. It's not as if the business of money changing in the temple was new. Everybody knew how it worked, even though nobody liked it. Pharisees were starting to get a little smug. This was just the kind of thing that they were hoping that would happen, that Jesus would lose control, that people would start to doubt. Those were frightening days. But then the Passover came. Now, how can you not be joyful on the Passover? The Passover is a feast of celebration, of freedom, of new life, of all of those kinds of things that have been important to our people for years and years and generations. It was one of our most important days that we gathered with Jesus to share that meal. And he broke the bread with us. He even washed everybody's feet. Now, I'll admit, sometimes we weren't exactly sure what he was talking about. The feet thing had us a little confused, but he talked about it in terms of service. He talked about it in terms of how we should all be serving one another. And again, he gave us a whole new perspective on how to look at the ways that we serve God and the ways that we love each other. And that was a wonderful day. Until later. Later that night when he was arrested and he was betrayed. Later that night and the next day when he was paraded around from the Romans to the high priests, when everyone mocked him, when he was put on trial, when he was beaten, when he was forced to walk that road carrying that cross, the cross upon which they crucified him, and we all stood there. We couldn't believe that this could possibly be happening. and yet it was real. And we suffered with him as he hung on that cross, and the most unbelievable thing happened as he died before us. That was the worst day. And then all we could do was wait over the course of the Sabbath so that we could go back, properly prepare his body and bury him. And then, do you know what happened? So the women went to the tomb. They did not know how they were going to roll away that great big stone, and when they got there, it was already open. And we started hearing stories that they had seen angels. And then Peter went running over there, and Peter saw angels. And Peter went into the tomb, and there was the tomb, and there was the cloth for Jesus' body and the cloth for Jesus' head, and they were laying right there, just as if he had been there and disappeared out from under them. And then Mary saw Jesus in the garden. And then Jesus would appear, and it would be hard to believe that it was him, but then people saw him. And others were a little skeptical because, after all, we saw him die. How could he be alive? And yet some of us remembered what he had said. You tear down this body and I will build it up in 3 days. And then Cleopas came back from Emmaus. We couldn't figure out why he was back from Emmaus. He had just walked there. But he came back and he was running and he couldn't wait. He couldn't wait to tell us that Jesus had walked the road with him. That Jesus had discussed the scriptures with him. That Jesus had sat down at a meal with him. That Jesus had blessed him. Cleopas said, "We have seen the Lord, and he is alive." All of those things, all of the ways that Jesus told us that God's love could conquer anything, now, how could we not believe it? How could it not be the truth? Now many have seen him, and many know about the love and the joy. So you might ask, now what? Jesus was alive, and then Jesus was dead, and now Jesus is alive again. So what? What happens? Well, I'm going back to my home. I'm going to go back to my work. And yet, the life that I go back to is not the same one that I left. Because I am not the same, and the world is not the same, and hope is not the same. Because now hope is taking over, where all kinds of other things used to rule. And Peter, and John, and James, and Andrew, they're all talking about how they are going to make Jesus' lessons come alive for others to remember, and how they're going to keep telling the story for those who did not have the privilege of knowing Jesus. And I know that at some point in my village, there will be an opportunity for me to help as well. And I will find a way to keep contributing just as I was when I was following Jesus and helping to keep the disciples in clean clothes. And I suspect that life from this day on is not going to be any easier than it was in the days before. I think that people are still going to have their own personal agendas. And that we are going to have to remind them that the world is not small and about them, but the world is big and is about God. And I think that people will still be greedy, and they will want all the power. And someone will have to remind them that it's not about a few people having a lot of things, but it's about the fact that when some people benefit, everyone benefits. And I suspect that Some people will still think that the law is most important, and others will have to remind them that what's most important is compassion and love and fairness and all of those things that Jesus talked to us about every single day. And I don't know what's going to happen. For all I know, when I get back to my hometown, my business will fail. People will still grow ill and die, and people will still be sad, and people will still grieve. And others will celebrate. And there will be births, and there will be deaths, and there will be all of those things that we have always had since the beginning of time. But I know something else, too. I know that the power of God's love is stronger than anything else. That anything that is thrown at us cannot win if we are living in the power of that love. I know that Jesus Christ is risen, and that makes every day from now on the best day. Amen.